How do you survive in an industry that's designed to forget you by 25? For Shalom Harlow, the answer was never loud. She didn't dominate the spotlight. She moved through it like smoke, graceful, elusive, impossible to pin down. While others posed, Shalom performed. Her walk, once described by Anna Wintour as one of the best of all time, wasn't just movement. It was presence. She didn't just walk the runway. She turned it into something else, something more like theater or ballet. In an age of glamazons and spectacle, she was something else entirely, an anti-supermodel with no need for theatrics. And in 1998, she created a moment that would echo across fashion history.
This was purely spontaneously improvised, every moment of it. So what you saw was my first instinct responding to the moment. I'm so good with jumping off a cliff into the unknown. I'm kind of more comfortable like that than having too much information.
This was Shalom, pure instinct, fluid grace, and underneath it all, a quiet power. She was one of the last models who could make silence look loud, but behind the poise was a body pushed too far, and a woman who'd spend years trying to come back to herself. This is the story of the supermodel who disappeared, and the unexpected way she returned. Shalom Harlow didn't grow up dreaming of the runway. She was raised in a hippie commune outside Oshawa, Ontario, a small Canadian city where the biggest show in town wasn't at Paris Fashion Week, but maybe the next Cure concert. She took ballet, tap, and jazz, not to become a model, but because she loved to move. Movement, for Shalom, was language, expression, a form of power that didn't require words. She once said she wanted to be an astronaut. Instead, she became a supermodel, one of the most recognizable faces of the 1990s. Shalom Harlow's entry into the fashion world was as unexpected as it was transformative. It was strange, sudden, and at first entirely unplanned. At 15, while attending a Cure concert in Toronto, she was approached by a modeling scout, a moment she brushed off at first.
And a talent scout approached me and asked me if I was a model or if I was interested in it. And I didn't take it seriously at first. I thought it was like one of those, come on, baby, I'll take you back to my place and make you famous, you know?
But it wasn't a joke. Within months, she had taken her first modeling lessons, done a few test shoots, and by 1993, she'd already landed her first magazine cover for Canada's Fashion. A year later, Vogue called her big news. Reflecting on this pivotal experience, Shalom shared, "So if I were to tell my 14-year-old self something, I would be like, oh baby, buckle up, take a deep breath, look around. You're leaving all of this soon, and you don't even know it."
To have a brunette on the cover of Vogue was actually kind of semi-revolutionary. I wasn't a blonde and I was on the cover of Vogue. It was significant.
Even as her star rose, there was still something different about Shalom. She wasn't brash or calculated or trying to be anything at all. She was just herself, still carrying the gentleness of her upbringing and the grace of a dancer trained to listen to her own rhythm. As photographer Stephen Meisel would later put it, she could transform into anything without ever losing herself. That duality, fluid but grounded, became her signature. And in an industry obsessed with labels, Shalom and her best friend Amber Valletta were something else entirely. They weren't glamazons. They weren't grunge rebels. They were dubbed the anti-supermodels. Softer, stranger, and somehow more modern. Designers loved them for it. So did photographers. And slowly, so did the public. We've all seen iconic friendships in fashion, but there was something uniquely magnetic about Shalom and Amber Valletta together. By the late 90s, they'd become such an effortless duo that brands started booking them as a package deal, as if one was incomplete without the other. You might even remember one particular runway when, according to some whispers, Shalom quietly, perhaps unintentionally, stole the spotlight.
Everybody makes it into some like, oh, they must have had a little bit of a bitch moment. It was not anything like that at all. It's just, I had a fast clip.
Their friendship wasn't about competition. It was about complementing each other perfectly, softly shifting expectations, quietly redefining what supermodels could be, and gently proving that sometimes the most memorable moments happen without even trying. Her timing couldn't have been better. The early 90s were craving a shift, away from the overly glamazoned energy of the 80s and into something raw, real, and relatable. Shalom wasn't Kate Moss, but they shared something essential, a new kind of beauty. The kind that didn't try too hard. The kind that wasn't engineered, just present. And by the time she stepped onto the runway for Chanel, Ferretti, Valentino, the industry began to take notice. She wasn't just walking the walk. She was reinterpreting what a model could be. A shapeshifter, a performer, an artist in motion. And even then, you could feel it. There was something different about Shalom. By the late 90s, Shalom wasn't just walking runways. She was shaping them. Designers trusted her instinct. Photographers chased her energy. Her strut wasn't exaggerated or aggressive. It was slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. And then came the moment that would define it all. She arrived in London off a red-eye flight, tired, jet-lagged, and with barely enough time to try on the dress. No rehearsal, no soundtrack, just a vague instruction.
Was shown some rotating platform and told I was going to stand on it. Well, I got sprayed in spray paint, and that was the download. That's all the information I got. There was no rehearsal.
That was all she was told. It was McQueen's Spring-Summer 1999 show, also known as Number 13. And Shalom was about to step into one of fashion's most unforgettable moments. As she walked into the center of the runway in a plain white dress, the crowd had no idea what was coming. The machines activated. Paint began flying, and her body just reacted.
This was purely spontaneously improvised, every moment of it. So what you saw was my first instinct responding to the moment.
You could see her dance training kick in, her movements measured, defensive at first, then almost balletic. She wasn't performing for the audience. In a later interview with Dazed, Shalom would describe the experience in her own words, not just as fashion, but something far more primal. It definitely felt like an aggressive, predatory sexualization of the mechanization of the modern world, interfering with something raw. That's what it felt like in the moment. People were crying in the audience, not because it was shocking, but because it was visceral. Real. Even McQueen himself later said it was the only show he ever cried during. Not because of the concept, but because of what Shalom brought to it. It wasn't about fashion anymore. It was a moment of instinct, risk, and vulnerability, the kind you can't plan. And it made history. For a while, it looked like nothing could stop her. She was still fronting major campaigns, still closing shows, still Shalom. But behind the scenes, her health was beginning to fail, quietly, gradually, and without a clear diagnosis for years. There was no announcement, no explanation. She simply disappeared, and for nearly a decade, people weren't sure why.
This was my return to modeling after 10 years of an illness in which I recovered from late-stage Lyme and severe black mold poisoning.
What she had kept private for so long finally came to light. Shalom had been struggling with late-stage Lyme disease and severe black mold poisoning from her home in Big Sur. She later described being bedridden, unable to function, her body and nervous system completely overwhelmed.
One of the aspects of my surviving late-stage Lyme's was that I was thrown into complex PTSD in a very extreme way.
She took a step back from everything. No runways, no campaigns. She moved to California and began focusing on recovery, not just physically, but emotionally. Through somatic therapy, yoga, and healing work, She started to rebuild. And what she discovered was that much of the trauma she carried wasn't just from illness. It was from entering an adult world before she was ready.
Not just speaking from an individual point of view, although this did happen personally to me, but I also have seen it within the industry as well, that kind of level of vulnerability and innocence combined with power, wealth, and prestige is a particularly dangerous combination.
It wasn't a scandal. Her story wasn't the loud burnout we're used to seeing in the headlines. It was something subtler and far more common. The quiet collapse of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Shalom stepped back from fashion at a time when few were talking openly about mental health, burnout, or the hidden cost of fame. She withdrew quietly, and when the time finally came to step back into the spotlight, she had no idea if the industry would still care. It wasn't announced with fanfare or an elaborate comeback strategy. It happened quietly, intentionally, a single moment of grace. It was a runway. Versace, 2019. At 45 years old, Shalom Harlow returned after nearly a decade of absence. And yet, as she glided effortlessly beneath the lights, it seemed as if no time had passed at all. For many watching, the moment felt nostalgic, a nod to the era she once defined. But for Shalom herself, it held a deeper significance. She didn't re-enter the industry to recapture her youth. It wasn't about proving herself or reclaiming lost years. Instead, it was an act of quiet resilience, an acknowledgement of her journey, her recovery, and her decision to come back on her own terms. Following that runway, Shalom started taking on new projects carefully and thoughtfully. Not a frantic rush back into the spotlight, but a measured return marked by selectivity. She appeared in magazine covers, ad campaigns, and most memorably, that viral Versace video where she dances freely, joyfully, wearing a metallic bodysuit.
I think most people thought that my smile was responding to that stimuli of welcome, and that was some of it, but the smile was coming from an inner place of I am well enough and I've achieved coming back to the place that I was before this illness took my life away.
For Shalom, returning wasn't about meeting expectations. It was about reintroducing herself authentically after years spent healing. She came back with clear boundaries, newfound wisdom, and a deeper understanding of herself and what she needed from the industry. Slowly, fashion began to see her not just as an icon of the past, but as a woman carrying a meaningful legacy forward. Her reappearance didn't disrupt. Rather, it quietly reaffirmed the place she'd always held. In 2023, she reunited with her longtime best friend, Amber Valletta, for a Vogue Hong Kong cover, reminding everyone of their iconic 90s partnership. She also starred alongside Kate Moss in Saint Laurent's fall campaign, subtly reinforcing a powerful message. Real style doesn't age out, it evolves. But Shalom's influence now goes beyond modeling itself. In recent years, she's become increasingly vocal about the changing values in fashion, including a desire for deeper meaning and more sustainable ways of working. Alongside her close friend Amber Valletta, a well-known environmental advocate, Shalom has aligned herself with conversations about conscious creativity and long-term change in the industry. She's less interested in spectacle and more in intention. Today, designers still call her, and magazines still feature her, but it's always on her terms. As long as the opportunities continue to be creative and respectful, it's a wonderful sandbox to play in, she said recently. For the generations that grew up watching her, and those just discovering her today, Shalom offers something uniquely valuable. Her elegance was never about perfection or performance. It was about authenticity. Her movements weren't exaggerated, her poses never forced. Even at the height of the supermodel era, she stood apart because of her subtle grace and quiet power. That's the kind of elegance people remember. Not perfect, not polished, but real. In a world that moves fast, she taught us that the most powerful thing you can do is move slow.